For our next segment, we're going to continue our discussion about the 2014 elections, continue to do some Monday morning quarterbacking. And for our guest in our next segment, we're going to be joined by Geoff Pallay, who's the Director of Strategic Projects at the Lucy Burns Institute. Geoff has been on the show many times before. Lucy Burns is the parent organization for Ballotpedia. And for those of you that have watched our show on more than one occasion, I think you've noticed we've had many guest visits from Ballotpedia. I call our Ballotpedia guests our Ballotpedia All-Stars. They're the most knowledgeable people in the country on politics when it comes to at least the statistical, the underlying statistics of politics. And their site, Ballotpedia, is our favorite site. It's actually not just our favorite site. I was talking to Geoff in preparation for this segment, and they had over 100 million visits last year. So congratulations to them on a great year. And we always recommend you to Ballotpedia for your research. It's a great site, and I think the more you use it, the more you'll see what a great site it is. Anyway, Geoff is one of our Ballotpedia All-Stars. In fact, he's, I think, kind of the quarterback of the Ballotpedia the All-Stars, the Tom Brady of the Ballotpedia All-Stars. And so in continuing with our Monday morning quarterbacking theme, I thought we'd have their quarterback on today. And again, take a look back at the 2014 elections. So, Geoff, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Always enjoy a good comparison to Tom Brady.
Well, they're talking about him being the all-time greatest quarterback right now, so maybe someday you'll be the all-time greatest political commentator or something.
Yeah, after living for 4 years in Boston, I think anyone would enjoy being compared to Tom Brady. He's quite revered up there.
Yeah, with good reason. So we're taking a look back at the 2014 elections, and I know when I turn on TV right now, everybody's already talking about 2016. But I still think there's some lessons and some takeaways from 2014. We thought we'd pick your brains today on, you know, how you saw it, how Ballotpedia saw it, and how it compared to the way you thought it was going to go.
Sure. Yeah, people are already talking about 2016. We're amazed by that. We've already launched our 2016 presidential coverage, and people are already searching heavily for information about 2016's presidential election. So politics never dies on some level, I think.
Well, maybe at the end of the interview today, you'll just predict who the Republican candidate is going to be and who the Democrat candidate is going to be, and no one will have to pay any more attention for the next year.
There you go. Don't hold me to it, though.
So what sticks out in your mind from 2014 as some of the highlights or lowlights of the election?
Sure. So, you know, there was certainly low turnout in this past election cycle. I think that's been covered pretty extensively in the news and in all the roundups that across the board, across the country, people just didn't turn out as much to vote this past midterm cycle. We saw that pretty starkly, especially in California, just across the board at every level of office, significantly lower turnout than 2010, which is the comparable midterm election cycle. So that's one thing that certainly stood out. The Republicans' performance up and down the ballot was a really interesting observation. I think everyone sort of expected that Republicans would keep the U.S. House. It was kind of unclear as to whether they would win the U.S. Senate, which they certainly did pretty overwhelming. But it was really interesting to see just how pronounced their victories were, at the state legislative level, where they flipped 10 chambers in their favor. At the state executive level, where there were 12 Tea Party governors who were elected in 2010. All 12 of them ran for re-election during this past cycle, which was kind of an interesting way to observe, what would the voters think about those Tea Party governors. This was essentially a referendum on them, and 11 of those 12 won re-election. The only one who was defeated was in Pennsylvania. So it was a pretty overwhelmingly strong Republican showing in this past election. That's kind of the biggest trend I think that we took away from it.
Well, when you're talking about turnout, I saw some obviously very frightening statistics. But a statistic I saw the other day was that in some municipalities, and it didn't talk about the populations, there were single-digit turnouts. I can't imagine single-digit turnouts in a general election.
Yeah, it's a really stark and alarming figure when that happens, isn't it? We are trying to combat those low turnout figures by just trying to make it easier for voters to feel empowered to participate in the political process. We hope that as we can make it easier for voters to obtain information about their school board candidates, about their municipal government candidates and local ballot measures and up and down the ballot, that'll hopefully encourage some more participation. But wow, you're right. Local turnout, it was pretty abysmal this past election.
Now we've talked about on this show with Brittany Klingon and some other members of your staff, low turnout when there's maybe a singular ballot measure or it's a school board election. But I've never heard of that single-digit turnout in a general election. It's pretty frightening.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. It's kind of hard to determine a real correlation right now between why. We've tried to take a look at some of the numbers and say, okay, well, is it because the races aren't competitive? And there isn't really a really statistical significant correlation between a more competitive election leading to greater turnout. So hard to say what that is, but it's I'm sure that hyperpolarization that's been going on up and down the ballot right now isn't helping.
Now, at the same time, you told me earlier there were less ballot measures in the past year.
Yeah, that's right. There were fewer ballot measures this year than in any year since 1988. It was actually the first time that the total number of statewide measures had dropped below 160 since 1988. Only 158 statewide ballot measures were on the ballot in 2014. So, yeah, pretty significant drop off.
Can you tie that out to any particular movement or political thinking or?
Yeah, it's hard to say, but there were certainly a huge number of initiatives that were not approved for the ballot. So, that might be because there were increased restrictions on getting ballot measures onto the ballot. It might be because state legislatures are passing laws that are making the barrier to entry higher to get initiatives certified. It might be because some organizations or individuals are moving away from initiatives and measures because they just don't maybe see the payoff in pursuing that route. So, yeah, probably a complicated amalgamation of a number of things leading to a reduction in the number of measures.
Now, how much do you think that maybe ties out to the fact that people saw it was going to be a low turnout year, saw in the primaries it was going to be a low turnout year, and they said, we'll get killed if we bring it up this year because not enough people are going to show up. What if we wait till the presidential election year? Maybe more people will come out.
Yeah, I think you're right that could be part of it. We definitely see, from cycle to cycle, there are a handful of hot topic measures where the groups and individuals behind them are extremely strategic in when they place that measure on the ballot, which actually, it goes even beyond just the decision between the midterm election versus a presidential election, but it even, it resonates with respect to whether they put it on the measure on the ballot at the primary or the general election. That's often a factor as well.
Yeah, because I don't think people realize how expensive it can be sometimes to get on the ballot. We had a conversation with some people from Illinois who were trying to get who actually were on the ballot, and how many millions of dollars it cost them to do that. So if you're only going to get one shot at doing it, you better pick the right time, the right shot.
Yeah, it's kind of put all your eggs in one basket, one chance only.
Exactly. So in terms of competitiveness, let me change topics with you now. I think last year when we had one of our ballot PD All-Stars on, you guys were predicting there were going to be maybe as few as 30 competitive seats in Congress. How did the competitiveness play out in reality, and how did it compare to your predictions?
Yeah, so we like to look specifically at the U.S. House elections to ascertain whether or not there are a certain number of competitive ones. We define a competitive election to be any race that has a margin of victory of fewer than 5%. So that would mean something like 51 to 49% or 50 to 47%. Anything with a margin of victory greater than 5%, we deem to be only mildly competitive. So before the election, we identified that there would be 26 districts that we thought would be competitive, that would fall within this 5 percentage point gap. It actually turned out after the fact that there were only 26 competitive districts. We didn't pick the exact 26 correctly, but there were 26 races during 2014 that were competitive to the point that they were within 5 percentage points. 15 of those were won by Democrats, and 11 of those were won by Republicans.
Now, do you actually, I don't know, we never talked about this before, do you do tracking leading up to an election to measure competitiveness almost month by month, week by week, or do you not have access to that kind of data?
We have started to move districts throughout the course of the election cycle, depending on as news changes. If an incumbent suddenly decides not to run, we'll oftentimes mark that as a competitive district if it seems to be the case. If there's a particularly pronounced campaign finance report that comes in that we think moves a race into competitive. Um, yeah, I guess So in short, those numbers are dynamic. We kind of vacillated between 26 and 29 throughout the course of the midterm election season, and settled on 26 at the end of the day.
So you had a great prediction.
Yeah, we were pretty happy with how it went, actually. Obviously, we would like to have picked the exact 26 districts correctly, but that's certainly a bit of a challenge for anyone who's in the predictive market.
I was on a site for Fair Vote today. I was doing some research for another interview. They're already predicting that there will be 62 or less competitive next time around. Do you guys have a guesstimate on that yet?
Yeah, I think we think it could be right around the same as 26 to 30 again, depending on what you're using as your demarcation line between what is competitive and what isn't. One really interesting observation we found from this past election, as opposed to 2012, a significant number of races bumped into what we would call blowout territory, which is a more than 20 percentage point victory for the winner. In 2012, Republicans won 140 races by more than 20 percentage points. In 2014, that number jumped to 192. So what that tells you is a significant number of races that were maybe marginally competitive in 2012 just evolved into a blowout territory this time around.
No. Another way I look at that, 2012 was the first election under the new maps, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
And sometimes those are more competitive elections. And then, particularly if you have an incumbent who gets challenged in the first year out, but then once again reestablishes him or herself as more prohibitive, from then on in, not only do they have a lock, but I think they get to blowout territory a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Once a name sort of becomes familiar within a district, there's a reason why incumbency re-election rates are always, greater than 90, 95%.
And again, when you have the remap year, you might find people are willing to put their neck on the line. I don't want to say a more attractive candidate, but maybe candidates who have a better chance of winning show up in those years. And then the out years, you just don't get the better challengers because they're not going to win anyway. And, like a sacrificial lamb kind of a scenario.
Yeah, that's right. And you also get those incumbent versus incumbent battles during that first election cycle. And those are always going to be, really heated and much more competitive.
Yeah, I think even more so at the state level, you get incumbent versus incumbent when they map people out of existence, kind of a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So it's kind of scary that you're not seeing any more competitiveness. How about if you look at the House versus the Senate? Is the competitiveness in the Senate getting any different? Because those are statewide votes.
Yeah, so the U.S. Senate elections, I think, ultimately will be pretty competitive next cycle. The 2016 candidates that are coming up are, much like with the gubernatorial cycle in 2014, these are the Tea Party U.S. Senate candidates. So in 2016, timing those Tea Party U.S. Senate candidates with the presidential election, that should create a number of heated battles across the board. So some of them could become more competitive, I think, than those U.S. House races, yeah.
Oh, interesting. How many Tea Party senators, as you call them, are there?
I'd have to look up that exact figure. Don't have that off the top of my head.
All right. Now, and last time around, I think there were more Republican senators up than Democrat. And how does that break out in 2016? Any idea how?
Yeah, we've got that on our site on Ballotpedia right now. I'd have to go look that up.
All right. Well, we'll make our viewers go look that up. Fair enough?
Exactly. You can find that on ballotpedia.org. It'll be right front and center.
So we talked to another Ballotpedia All-Star last year about trifectas.
Mm-hmm.
And again, for our viewers, trifectas are scenarios where a state is governed by the governor holds the same party as does the entire legislature. So the governor, the Senate, and the House is all one party. And going into the last vote, the Republicans had a record number of trifectas,
Yep.
and you guys were trying to predict shifts in trifectas. So how did that play out?
Yeah, so there were 36 trifectas heading into the election last cycle. 23 of those were Republican, and 13 of those were Democratic. There were a handful of trifectas that we thought could have flipped one way or the other. If there had been more trifecta pickups, there was the possibility that we could have reached 40. It really just depended on what voters preferred when they came to the polls. Were they looking for single party government? Were they looking for divided government? And what came of it was something that certainly breaks the trend from the last few years, which is that voters, for the first time in a very long time, went for more divided government than they have in the past. So, as a result of the election, the Democratic states lost 6 of their trifectas, going from 13 down now to 7, and Republicans stayed at 23 by picking up 2 trifectas and losing 2 trifectas. So what you have now are you have 7 Democratic trifectas, 23 Republican, and then 20 divided governments.
Have you tried to marry your analysis of ballot measures to trifecta states? Because I'm wondering, if I had a ballot measure and I'm in a trifecta state, my ballot measure might do better if it's prone to that party.
Yeah, depending on the topic, I could see something like that being the case. It would be an interesting sort of study to do. It kind of reminds me of things like, gay marriage losing in California, or minimum wage losing in Maine, while, say, Democratic candidates won. That's from years ago, but that's certainly an interesting correlation, I think, to look into, and something that could be very plausible.
Any trends you're seeing this early in the game that you want to, that Ballotpedia is going to focus on, let's say?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if there are any, changes in these states that lost trifectas. Specifically, it's very interesting to see what goes on in Massachusetts and Maryland and Illinois, where you have very historically Democratic states that introduce new Republican governors. How is that going to change the political climate in those states in years ahead? You could say similarly with Pennsylvania, where you now have a Democratic governor with a Republican state legislature. What's that going to do? So, that should be certainly something that voters should keep their eye on in those states. Do those states see improvements in policy? Are the voters happier with the outcomes in those states? Which, if so, could lead to maybe a national trend where voters in other states say, "Hey, we kind of like what we see from Massachusetts and from Maryland and from Illinois, where you have divided government. Maybe we should try something like that." That's one thing to watch for. Or maybe the pendulum actually flips back the other way, and those voters say, geez, we really like it when there's single party government, because that lines up with our values, so we're going to move back in that direction. Who knows which way that
Well,
will
you
go.
mentioned Illinois, and I've spent a lot of my career in Illinois.
Yes.
Illinois might be an interesting state to watch, as will Pennsylvania, but for this reason. A lot of people don't understand this. This may be another data set for you. Illinois has a Republican governor, and it's an all-Democratic legislature. But it also has a Democratic legislature with veto-proof majorities in both houses.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how many veto-proof chambers there are around the country, and I don't know whether or not the element of veto-proofness, if there's such a word, how that impacts governing.
Yeah, that is something that we track, and that's something we've looked at a lot over the years. There are some states that actually don't require the veto-proof majority. I think Arkansas was one of those states that we were always, curious about how their policy was enacted because of that. And that certainly, that impacts ballot measures oftentimes, where you might need a, 2/3 majority to get a measure on the ballot. So yeah, depending on which state you're in and whether or not you need those veto-proof majority or not, that could significantly weaken the impact that an alternative governor would have.
Well, Geoff, time always flies when we're having fun, so thank you. But before
Yes.
we leave, I'd like to, give our viewers the pitch for Ballotpedia, how to find you guys, and why you're the best site on the web.
Yeah, so the website's ballotpedia.org. It's an online encyclopedia about American politics and elections. Our goal is to empower the voter, make it easier for you to engage in the political process, local, state, and federal level. We just want to make it easier for you to take control and take part of the process. And, like Steve talked about at the beginning of the call, hopefully increase voter turnout and make our political process a smoother thing.
Well, Geoff, thanks as always for your time. We'll look forward to your reports throughout the year. And you're already gearing up for 2016, so I'm sure by the next time we talk, you'll have a lot of great news for us what's ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Always a pleasure being on the show, Steve. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much.